Okay, I'm going to get started by welcoming everyone. Welcome to Wat Tung Yu. Welcome to everyone who's joining online as well. I'm going to be starting with meditation like we do each class. And then after our breathing mindfulness meditation, I'm going to share a topic from our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. What I'm going to be sharing today is chapter 20, which is titled Animal to Human, the Evolution of Our Consciousness, where you can understand this evolution of this consciousness that now that you're in this human realm, the unenlightened mind functions very much like an animal. And what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're shedding those animalistic instincts, becoming more and more human. So I'm going to help you guys to understand this and the 5 realms of existence, and you'll be able to learn more after our meditation. But I'm going to start with the meditation, where we're going to be starting with some chanting to ease into the meditation. Then I'm going to be providing some guidance while we're actually in the meditation. Then there's going to be a period of time where it's just quiet and we're all meditating together. Then we'll come out of that with some more chanting. So if you'd like to join for meditation and the chanting, there's actually chanting sheets over there on the cabinet. You're welcome to help yourself to chant along. For those of you guys online, I think you know that you can get this from our website of buddhadailywisdom.com. You can click on free books and then scroll down towards the bottom and you'll be able to see the chanting sheet there. So I'll do the chanting. You guys are welcome to join in, and then I'll come back in with the guidance afterwards. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Apivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Arhasa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusanang Bhutto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. A nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind focused on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. ระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเขวาโอตังมหาเขวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเขวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินับโมอะระหะสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมอะระหะสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมอะระหะสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหาเขวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารนังสัมโมโนสกขาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาดัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภควาติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation, once again, welcome to everyone here at the temple. Welcome to everyone joining online as well. Today is what we call our group learning program, where each Sunday and Wednesday I get together with students, helping them to understand the teachings of the Buddha that guide you on the path to enlightenment. This is a 7-month program where each Sunday I go chapter by chapter in this book, helping students to gradually understand what the Buddha taught in order to be able to guide your mind to this enlightened mental state, where the mind can be completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're no longer experiencing any discontent feelings. So part of what you're doing on this path to enlightenment, the actual focus of what you're doing is purifying the mind of certain pollutions that the Buddha discovered in the mind. These are called the 10 fetters, or some people refer to them as defilements or taints. What these fetters are is there are 10 individual pollutions that the Buddha discovered, and he figured out the tools and techniques of how to uproot them and eliminate them out of the mind. During the lifetime of the Buddha, a fetter is a shackle and a chain and a ball that is around the ankle of a prisoner. This is how they keep prisoners confined to a certain area, is they would attach a fetter to their ankle. And just like you release a fetter from the ankle of a prisoner and this person is now free, it's the same thing that's true about your mind. When you eliminate these pollutions out of the mind, these 10 fetters are uprooted. The mind is now free. It's where you experience the peace and the calmness and serenity, the contentedness and joy. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're not experiencing any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All these feelings in others are eliminated from the mind through purification of the mind, through training of the mind. So this chapter 20 that we're in this book series, it's titled Animal to Human, the Evolution of Our Consciousness. And what I do in this chapter is help students to understand how this existence in the human realm has evolved out of existences from previous existences potentially in the animal realm, because the unenlightened human mind functions very much like an animal. Human beings were not animals, but the unenlightened mind can function very much like an animal. And what you're doing on the path to enlightenment, among other things, you're purifying the mind, but you're also shedding these animalistic instincts, becoming more and more of a better human being. That's what you're doing on this path. And by understanding this, it can actually help you to be able to understand what work you need to be able to do in order to be able to train your mind to get to this enlightened mental state. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to share with you, starting off, the problems, or at least some of them, that the Buddha discovered in the mind. Then we're going to talk about these 5 realms of existence. The Buddha taught this cycle of rebirth in these 5 realms. I'm going to help introduce students to that. Then we're going to talk about how the mind can potentially experience observation of past lives. And then ultimately, I'm going to kind of circle back around and help you to be able to see what you're doing on this path to enlightenment, among other things, to be able to shed these animalistic instincts, getting to a better and better existence as a human being. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, there's no struggles or challenges in your day-to-day life. You have certain difficulties and struggles in the unenlightened state, but by the time you get to enlightenment, everything's at ease. You can conduct your life with peacefulness and joy, with harmony in all your relationships, that you don't experience the bitterness and harshness and hostility in the mind any longer. But as an animal will have difficulties with that. And as an unenlightened human being, unenlightened human being will have those same difficulties. So let me first describe what these challenges are, these problems that the Buddha discovered in the unenlightened mind, and then this will help you to understand more what I'm talking about here, of this evolution from animal existences to human existence. So the Buddha, as I mentioned, he describes these 10 fetters. That's the deepest level of detail that you can see that the Buddha talks about these pollutions. But when he talks about them from a high level, he describes them as craving, anger, and ignorance, or we might say greed, hatred, and delusion. This is the way that some people refer to it. They're referred to as the 3 poisons, or the 3 unwholesome roots, or the 3 fires. This is the 3 high-level things that are plaguing the mind and keeping it in this unenlightened state. What craving is the mind longing, yearning, and chasing after the objects of its affection. If the mind gets what it wants, it gets pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But if the mind doesn't get what it wants, it gets painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. And as that painful feelings are arising, that anger and hatred is arising, the mind in the unenlightened state firmly believes that it's coming from something external. You might think it's your brothers or sisters, or your mom or dad, or your boss, or your life partner, or your children, that is causing you to be angry. But that's not what's causing you to be angry. What's causing the mind to be angry is this craving, this desire, this longing, yearning, wanting things to be a certain way, expecting things to be a certain way. The mind craves permanence when you live in an impermanent world. So for example, if you got a brand new car and you were really excited about this brand new car, and you took it and you parked it at a store, you might be so happy that you got this brand new car. You're so excited based on the condition that you've got this brand new car. But now when you come out of the store and you see a scratch on your car, you would be frustrated or angry or irritated or annoyed. It's not the scratch that's causing the anger and the frustration. And it's not the person who scratched the car. What's causing this is the mind is craving permanence, wanting this car to look permanently beautiful, when in reality, this car can't be permanently beautiful. It's not possible because you live in an impermanent world. The paint's going to fade. The tires are going to need to be changed. The upholstery is going to get ripped and torn. These things are going to happen. And if your mind craves permanence, you can only be happy when you get what you want. That's where the pleasant feelings are coming in. But then when the mind's not getting what it wants, it experiences these painful feelings. So if the mind wants it to be sunny outside and you wake up and it's sunny, you'll be so happy and excited about that. But because your feeling is based on an impermanent condition, now when it moves to rain, you'll be sad or frustrated, irritated, or annoyed. Or if you get really happy when your bank account balance is up here, then when it goes down here, you'll be sad or frustrated or annoyed. The only thing that's happening here is change. That's all that's happened. It went from sun to rain. It went from the bank account balance here to here. That's all it is change, but the mind's craving permanence, wanting things to be permanent. When you live in an impermanent world, things are constantly changing. So when this cravings are getting fulfilled, those pleasant feelings are there, but then when it's not getting fulfilled, these painful feelings come in, like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. And when that anger is coming up, the mind firmly believes that it's something external that's causing this. So what the mind will tend to do is it'll push people away, or it'll push the situation away. You might have done this with friends or family where you thought that they were the ones causing you to be angry and you pushed them away. But you can see that this didn't solve the problem because you still get annoyed, you still get frustrated or agitated. Or the second thing an individual will do when they don't understand that the problem is actually within one's own mind is you'll be bitter and harsh and hostile, almost like growling and roaring at another being. It's like an animal growling. It's like, "Arr." It's like, do things my way. The mind's trying to get things my way. That bitterness and hostility is rising up in the mind, trying to fear this other being into doing things your way. And here you can't live harmoniously with all beings because it's only a matter of time before someone does things differently than the way that you do them. You might have been in knockdown, drag-out fights with people trying to convince them that they have to stop doing what they're doing in order for you to not be angry. But this is the mind craving permanence, wanting everybody to do things a certain way. And then the third thing the mind will do when it has this craving and the anger is arising, not understanding that it's coming from one's own mind, is you'll put your expectations on people, trying to control them or force them to do things your way. This is the mind pressuring, attempting to pressure someone to do things your way. The mind thinks if I can just get my cravings fulfilled, if this person will just do things my way, everything will be perfect. But the problem here is that there's 8 billion people in the world, and you can't train 8 billion people to do things your way. It's just not possible. So in this situation, you can't live harmoniously with all beings because it's only a matter of time before someone does things differently than you. And the mind's going to want to push them away, be bitter, harsh, and hostile to them, or put your expectations on people and try to control them. And you might even have people that are doing this to you too, right? Because they don't understand. And that's where this third pollution or this third poison or unwholesome root comes in, is that the mind just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. Some people call it ignorance. I don't use that phrase. I just use it here so that people understand. If they've studied with other teachers, they understand where it's coming from, because ignorance is like a derogatory word. It's a degrading or diminishing word. The better way to think about this is the unknowing of true reality, the lack of wisdom, confusion, misunderstanding, that the mind just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand, because it's craving and anger here that is causing the difficulties and struggles, and this anger is coming from one's own mind. The mind, because of its lack of wisdom or its ignorance, its confusion, will firmly believe it's coming from something external until you independently verify it for yourself and you see the truth through your own experiences. Because you can take your own situations where you get angry and frustrated and you can peer into it and you can see that it's coming from your own mind. Like take a recent situation where you've been angry or frustrated or irritated. Look at that with these fresh eyes. What was it that your mind was longing, yearning for? And if you would have got what you wanted or what you expected, you would have been happy. But because you didn't get what you wanted or expected, the mind was angry or frustrated or sad. So it's because the mind lacks wisdom that it continues to crave and it continues to have this anger and frustration. It's like being stuck in this continuous cycle over and over and over again. So while we call it craving, anger, and ignorance, it's because of the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality that the mind continues to crave and it continues to have anger. If you arise wisdom and you see the truth of what's truly going on here, and you apply the tools and techniques to eliminate it and transform it, you can actually get to the point where your mind's completely peaceful and joyful because you've purified the mind of craving and anger. So that's why you need wisdom. There's no belief in the teachings of the Buddha. You're not believing a bunch of things and then hoping something good happens when you die. You're learning, growing, developing, you're cultivating this wisdom to then understand how to train your mind. So as an unenlightened human being, they will experience craving, anger, and ignorance. And this is going to keep the mind continuing to experience discontentedness over and over and over again. And animals experience this too. But an unenlightened human being is experiencing the same thing and growling and roaring at other beings like an animal. Even you can look at an animal that they'll have a certain territory and they will mark out their territory. And if another animal approaches their territory, they'll growl and roar. Well, human beings essentially do the same thing. They'll put a fence around their house. And now when somebody comes close to their house, hey, get off my land. This is my property. Get away. Right? Maybe with a gun and everything, right? Like, get away, right? This is a human being in the unenlightened state trying to have this craving. I don't want anybody on this land. This is my land. Get away, right? So there's different things that are plaguing the mind and causing this to occur. So as I mentioned, this is the high-level way to understand the pollutions that the Buddha discovered in the mind. But there's more detail in the 10 fetters. And these are two of the fetters that I'm going to talk about here in more detail, because you can see how it relates to this human existence, being in the unenlightened state, functioning like an animal, because you'll be able to see how these relate to animal existences. What personal existence view is this pollution or this fetter in the mind, where the mind is clinging to this body, or it's clinging to the mind, craving permanence, wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. The mind will cling to a certain self-image or a certain self-identity, and it only feels comfortable when people are perceiving you the way that you want to be perceived. So, for example, if you've been in a social situation and you spilt, say, spaghetti sauce or chocolate ice cream on your clothing, and you were embarrassed in that situation, that's your personal existence view. The mind is craving and clinging to this self-image, thinking that this is who you are as a person, wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. And when you're being perceived that way, you feel good, you feel comfortable. But when you're not being perceived that way, the mind's going to have this uncomfortableness or this discontentedness, these painful feelings in the mind. If you've ever stood in front of your closet and you thought about, who am I going to see today and how do I want to look? And you thought about these certain clothing that you wanted to pull out and you wanted to wear those clothing. Maybe you put it on and you looked in the mirror, you're like, no, that's not how I want to look. And you put on another set of clothing, you're like, no, that's not how I want to look. And by the time you got the third one on, you're like, okay, now I feel comfortable going outside. This is because the mind wants to be perceived by others in a certain way. Or maybe if you saw a pimple or a wrinkle or a mole, or maybe you were losing your hair, or you started having gray hair, and you saw that in the mirror, you might have been shaken up by that. Because this is the mind craving permanence of this physical body, wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. When I was growing up as a kid, I used to get out the gel and the mousse and I'd run it through my hair, and I was on my way to school and I had to get every little hair in exactly the right spot. And sometimes I did this for so long, I would miss the school bus on the way to school, right? This is not feeling comfortable going outside until you look a certain way. This is the mind having personal existence view, clinging to this body, wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. So the Buddha ultimately teaches you how to eliminate this from the mind, because it's actually hindering you from having peace and joy. But as an animal, we actually needed this personal existence view, because when we were a deer, say for example, and we were in the field grazing and eating grass, if there was a predator on the edge of the forest, we needed to see that predator and be like, oh my gosh, I need to keep this body safe, and we needed to run away, right, in order to keep ourselves safe. And that's how animals function, because they don't have this higher consciousness to be able to make wise decisions about their own safety. As a human being, we can make wise decisions about our own safety, and we can choose to go certain places or not go certain places in order to be able to stay safe. But as an animal, they don't have that ability. So they rely on this personal existence view, that they experience this fear when they see that animal, and now they run away in order to be able to stay safe. And then when your mind's all shaken up with that fear, you don't typically make wise decisions. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to get to a point where your mind can be calm and peaceful and steady, where it's unshakable, and you can make wise decisions in your day-to-day life. So while in animal existences, we needed this personal existence view, in this human realm, we don't need it. We can actually get to a point where we shed it, and we understand that this body is not who we are, that this body is going to change, and it doesn't define who we are as a person. So when we get a wrinkle, if we get a mole, if we get a gray hair, if we start getting extra fat, we can be comfortable with that. And of course, we would like to attend to this body and try to take care of it as best as possible. But when these changes are occurring, we're not shaken up by it. We're not frustrated or agitated or feeling like less of a person or something of that nature. So this personal existence view comes from our multiple animal existences. And then when we get into the human realm, it's still intact. The same thing is true about this conceit. What conceit is the measuring and comparing, thinking of yourself as being superior to others or inferior to others, where you're judging other people and you're looking down on them, or you're putting yourself below people and you're shaken up by that. If you put yourself above people and you talk down to people, then in certain situations, you're going to put yourself below people too. And this is going to keep the mind shaken up. And you can't be peaceful and joyful, and you can't be harmonious in these situations, because if you go into human interactions with people and you're putting yourself above people and looking down on them, they're not going to like that, and they're just going to push you aside. Maybe you've been to a party before, a social event, and someone rolls up on you and like, so what do you do? Oh, I'm a lawyer. Oh, really? Well, I'm a doctor. Right? There's almost like this pecking order that the mind's looking for, right? And now everybody's got to find out who's above each other, right? But then if you do it that way, then you're also going to put yourself below people in certain situations. Maybe you go in your boss's office and you're all shaken up because you think they're above you. And now your boss lacks confidence in you to be able to give you that new project that's going to really help your career, because you're all shaken up and you're uncalm when you're in your boss's office. This is coming from the mind's conceit, where it's judging others and you're measuring and comparing people and putting yourself above people or below people, and you talk down to one group of people and you talk up to another group of people. Well, this is coming from our animal existences as well, because as animals, we needed that pecking order. If we didn't have that pecking order, we wouldn't have actually survived, because when we were a pack of wolves, we needed to know who's the alpha male and who's the alpha female, because they're going to teach us how to hunt. They're going to teach us how to be better and better wolves. And when we were a herd of elephants, we needed to know who was the matriarch of our herd, because the matriarch was going to show us where the food is, where the watering holes are, where the migration paths are. If we were just kind of a single roaming elephant in the jungle, we wouldn't have been able to know where all these things are. So having a pecking order in the animal realm is what kept us alive. So now when we come into the human realm, the mind retains this. And now the mind has difficulties in this human realm to just think of everybody as being equal. And now when you're putting yourself above people and talking down to people, you can't see that person as they truly are through loving kindness and compassion. And this person doesn't like the way that you're talking to them, and they'll tend to just push you aside. But also, if you do that, you're going to put yourself below people and you're going to be shaken up in that situation too. And now you can't have harmonious relationships with all the people around you. So by getting rid of this conceit, you can actually have more fulfilling, sustaining, and satisfying relationships. So these are actually coming from our animal existences, but the mind in the unenlightened state continues to have them, and it continues to plague the mind, continuing to experience difficulties and struggles in the day-to-day life, the way you're making decisions through these personal existence view and conceit. So your current life in your previous life has conditioned the mind. What we mean by that is that you've had certain experiences that condition the mind to think a certain way, and now you function through that conditioning of the mind. But what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're unconditioning the mind. You're purifying the mind, and you're eliminating these pollutions of the mind. But you need to be able to see that that's actually what you're doing. And that's what you're going to be able to see by the time we get to the end of our talk today. So the Buddha taught this cycle of rebirth, that there's this continuous rebirth through multiple existences. And this isn't something that you should believe. None of the teachings of the Buddha are based in belief. And when people first start studying with me, I help them to understand that you need to learn, examine, and investigate the teachings of the Buddha. You need to then reflect on them to independently verify whether they're true or they're false. And then you need to practice his teachings, integrating them into your day-to-day life and actively training your mind. This is what's going to lead to wisdom. That's what transforms this ignorance, because it's the ignorance that's keeping the mind trapped in this unenlightened state. And the only way to transform that is to get to wisdom. So it's through learning, examining, and investigating, through reflecting to independently verify the teachings, and then practicing them, that's going to allow you to be able to cultivate that wisdom and be able to see how to make your way towards the enlightened mental state. So in the unenlightened state, the mind is full of this lack of wisdom. So you're never interested in believing the teachings of the Buddha, because with belief, you don't know it's true or false. You're just believing what either somebody convinced you to believe or you convinced yourself to believe it. So when someone first starts on the path to enlightenment, I suggest that they set aside the cycle of rebirth, that they don't focus on it when they first get started, because there's core central teachings that you need to know, like the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 Precepts, meditation training, learning about the natural law of karma, Brahma Viharas, all these different things that I've been teaching up to this point in this program. This program is a 7-month program, and we're about 6 months into it at this point. So I've been teaching all these different things. But then what I do here in chapter 20 is I introduce students to the cycle of rebirth and to helping them understand that what you're doing is you're shedding these animalistic instincts, becoming a better and better human being. So I'm going to introduce you guys to the 5 realms of existence, but I can see that you guys have never studied with me before. There's people online that are joining us right now that they've been studying all the way through this entire program. I actually just started teaching here at the temple at nighttime recently. That's why there's not many people here studying. A lot of the people here locally, they know I teach in the morning, so that's usually when they come. But there's people online that have been studying with me for a while now, so they've learned all those foundational teachings. So if this is your first time learning with me, understand that the cycle of rebirth is not typically where you will start your journey on the path to enlightenment, because what's happened in the past, it's in the past. It doesn't matter right now. And what may or may not happen in the future, it's in the future. It doesn't matter. Right now, you're in this human existence. You need to focus on developing your mind and making your way to enlightenment. And that's why we usually start you with the foundational teachings. But I am going to introduce you to these teachings of the cycle of rebirth, because the Buddha taught this cycle of rebirth for a reason, because he's teaching you what is true reality and what's truly happening in the world. Because if you start having certain experiences that you don't understand about the world that you live in, it can really shake you up. So there's some people that can see these different beings, like hell beings, afflicted spirits, which are ghosts, heavenly beings. Sometimes people think about these beings as being really in far distant lands, but they're all in the same time and space as us. It's not like hell beings are deep down in the core of the earth and heavenly beings are way up in the sky somewhere. They're actually all in the same time and space as us. And if you start seeing these beings and you didn't understand that this is true reality, this is what's truly happening, you could think you're going crazy. Or some people can actually hear these beings. They're having conversations and they're trying to communicate with you. And once again, if you heard these voices, you could think that you're going crazy. But just like you're in a restaurant and 2 tables over, you could hear somebody talking loud and you can just ignore it because you know, like, oh, those are human beings. They're having a conversation. I'm just going to ignore it and focus on my conversation. You can actually do the same thing with these other beings too, if you understand that this is normal. So the Buddha taught the cycle of rebirth because it's true, and you can actually experience residual memories from your past lives. Whereas if you started having recurring memories that you were murdered and you didn't understand that this was a previous life, and you just kept having these recurring memories over and over, and you know it didn't happen in this life because you're still alive, right? This could really shake you up. So the Buddha is teaching you the cycle of rebirth for a reason, because it's actually true, and this is what actually did occur and has been occurring. In volume 11, chapter 105 of our book series, I teach you 17 different ways to verify the cycle of rebirth, because oftentimes people are believing that they only have one life. But with belief, you don't know what's true or false. You're just believing it. You don't have any evidence that you only have just one life, except for maybe right now you can't recall your past lives. But as you're lifting this pollution out of your mind, you can get to a point where potentially you might start observing your past life and starting having memories of these. Even right now, sometimes people, before they've even studied the teachings of the Buddha, there's something that people oftentimes experience, which is their residual memories from their previous life coming to the forefront of their mind. If you guys are familiar with something called deja vu, if you've ever heard of this is where you're experiencing a certain thing and you feels utterly familiar to you, but you know it wasn't in this life. In fact, you might go to a certain town or a certain country that you've never been to in this life whatsoever. And you're like, oh my gosh, this feels so familiar, right? Usually that happens for about 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And then you just push it to the side. You're like, whatever, right? This is your residual memories from your previous lives bubbling up to the front of your mind, right? So there's things like this that are indications for you to be able to see that you have had previous lives, but because people aren't studying it and they're not understanding it, they tend to just push it aside, or they think they're going crazy or something like this. So the Buddha taught the cycle of rebirth because you're going to need to understand it in your journey to enlightenment, because you're very likely to potentially have experiences with beings in these other realms, or remembering your past lives, or hearing voices, or being able to see these beings. And if you see these types of things, or you have these type of things occurring, you need to understand that it's normal. And that's what understanding the cycle of rebirth is going to help you to be able to do. So the Buddha taught this cycle of rebirth because each being that is in the unenlightened state is continuously being reborn over and over and over again. And each of these 5 realms are not permanent, because we can look around the world and we can see that nothing is permanent around you. Everything is constantly changing. But some people have been taught and they're believing that these realms are permanent. So the Buddhist teachings aren't based on getting to this wonderful afterlife in heaven, right? The Buddhist teachings are about getting to a wonderful life now in this existence. But he taught about this heavenly realm because there's beings that are in the heavenly realm, and you might see them, you might hear them, you might hear their voices, or you might have even been in the heavenly realm before. So I'll explain to you guys what this realm is. This realm is not a permanent realm. Beings that are in the heavenly realm, they're still in the cycle of rebirth, and they're going to need to be reborn if they don't get to enlightenment. They can get to enlightenment in the heavenly realm, but they tend to lack motivation and encouragement to be able to make their way to enlightenment because they experience exclusively pleasant feelings. In the human realm, we experience pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. So we tend to have built-in motivation to be able to get to enlightenment because we don't like those painful feelings, and we don't like those feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. So we tend to be interested to get to enlightenment. But in the heavenly realm, they only experience pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, and euphoria. So they tend to be complacent and lack motivation to grow and develop and escape out of the cycle of rebirth by getting to enlightenment. These beings are formless beings. They don't have physical form like you and I. In the human realm, we have physical form, but in the heavenly realm, they don't have physical form. But they can sometimes be seen because it's almost like fog. Like fog is formless. There's little water droplets there, but it's kind of like, it's just really, it's there, but it's not there. It's just like fog. And that's what these beings in the formless realms are experiencing, that they don't have physical form, but they can be seen by some people. It's almost like an apparition or little water droplets. So this heavenly realm, sometimes people have been taught that it's permanent, but it's not permanent. It's impermanent. And you can see around the world around you the universal truth of impermanence, that things are constantly changing, right? You can see we started with a certain number of people in the class, and now we've got a different number, right? So more people came and some people left. You can see that it's constant change. That's change. You can see that your body's constantly changing. Your relationships are constantly changing. Your jobs are constantly changing. Your bank account's constantly changing. Everything around you is constantly changing. So this heavenly realm is just like all the other things in the world, which is the universal truth of impermanence, where things are constantly changing. But sometimes people have been taught that this is permanent. And sometimes that comes from the Bible, of the Christian Bible, or the Quran or something of this nature. But even in the Christian Bible, you can actually see that the heavenly realm is not permanent. They actually talk about beings that were in the heavenly realm that got kicked out and they got sent to hell. Right? So it's not a permanent existence, but people think that it is permanent. But you can see even in the texts like the Bible and the Quran and stuff like this, that it's not actually a permanent existence. So people are believing these things, but you need to be able to see the truth for yourself. So these beings in the heavenly realm, they can get to enlightenment, but they tend to not get to enlightenment, and they're reborn down into these other realms. The human realm, these beings, as you know, you're probably most familiar with this realm, they experience pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant feelings. We might say that this is the ideal existence because we're motivated to be able to make our way to enlightenment because we don't like those painful feelings and the neither painful nor pleasant ones. But even in the human realm, people can be complacent. The people aren't interested in doing the work to be able to train their mind and grow and develop and becoming a better and better person. So even in the human realm, there's a certain level of complacency, even though there's that built-in motivation. So we might say that this is like the ideal existence in the human realm because we have the ability to get to enlightenment, and we can train our mind to be able to get to this point where the mind's completely peaceful and joyful. But individuals oftentimes even lack motivation, even in this existence as a human being. So the human realm is not permanent either. We know that we were born, so therefore we're going to experience sickness, aging, and death, right? This is impermanence. That's all that is. But people typically have a lot of difficulties with sickness, aging, and death because their mind's craving permanence. If you're craving permanent health, and now when you're sick, your mind is agitated and frustrated and annoyed because you don't understand that this body is impermanent. If you're craving permanent youthfulness, when you experience aging, your mind doesn't like that. It doesn't like those wrinkles. It doesn't like how you have to move around a little bit slower and there's more aches and pains in different parts of the body. The mind doesn't like that, right? So the mind's craving permanence. And then when you get to the end of this life and there's death that is coming, the mind doesn't like that. It's craving permanent life in all these material possessions and all these relationships. The mind's holding on and craving permanence. So in this human realm, individuals can get to enlightenment, but again, they tend to be somewhat complacent or just not even know that there's a way to escape out of these discontent feelings. So people go around continuing to lack this wisdom going through life because we were all taught how to clean the body, but we weren't taught how to clean the mind. But there's more than just the body to this being. There's these two different parts to this being. And if you're only taught how to clean the body and that's what you're doing, if you're walking around with this mind that hasn't been purified and cleaned up, that's why the stress and anger and frustration is coming into the mind. So then after the human realm, we've got the afflicted spirit realm. This is what we might refer to as ghosts. These beings are also formless. They don't have physical form, and they experience the painful feelings and the feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. They don't experience any pleasant feelings. And these beings can't get to enlightenment from that existence. But just like all the other realms, it's an impermanent existence. They can be reborn into other realms to have the opportunity to be able to get to enlightenment. So these beings tend to have a deep craving and attachment to people, places, and possessions. This is why someone might say, my house is haunted. Well, all that's really happening is there was somebody that was associated with this house. They've died as a human being, and now their mind's holding on to this house, and it doesn't want to let go. It's craving permanence. So now this apparition or this ghost is hanging out around this house, not realizing that it needs to let go and move on. Right? So this is what an afflicted spirit is a being that has a certain amount of craving, desire, attachment to people, places, and possessions. And now it tends to hang out amongst those people, places, or possessions, and it's not willing to move on and let go. So these beings cannot get to enlightenment, but they can be reborn into the human realm or heavenly realm with an opportunity to get to enlightenment. Then there's the animal realm. You guys are probably familiar with this realm as well. They also have physical form, just like us, and they experience the same feelings as us. They experience pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. They can't develop their mind enough to get to enlightenment in that existence, but they can be reborn into other existences to then be able to make their way to enlightenment. So in the human realm, we tend to actually be very fascinated by animals, right? And this is because of our existences in the previous lives of being in the animal realm. So animals left to their own devices will tend to be untamed and undeveloped. They're going to be wild animals, essentially. But as they spend time around human beings like us, we tend to train them and teach them to be kinder, gentler, more loving and kind. And this is actually helpful for them to be able to make their way closer to like a human existence or a heavenly existence to then be able to get to enlightenment in those future existences. But in this animal existence, they can't develop their mind enough to actually get to enlightenment. So that's why you don't see animals in here meditating with us, right? It'd be neat if they did, but it's not possible because they don't have that level of consciousness to even realize that they need to do that. Animals tend to be preoccupied with things like killing, stealing, having sex, playing, fighting, right? This is what animals do. They're just operating through basic survival instincts. They oftentimes are killing just to be able to survive. And once you're in the animal realm, it's almost like a prison. It's very challenging to get back out of it because you need to have multiple animal existences to be able to then make your way out. Because, for example, like a lion or a tiger or something like this, they need to kill in order to survive, right? They're just constantly killing in order to survive. This is why their lifespan is so short. They only have about the 8 to 12 year lifespan as a lion or a tiger, because they're constantly killing, and that puts wear and tear on the body and the mind to be able to do that. Same thing like a snake. They tend to live for very short periods of time. But if you look at something like an elephant or a turtle, they tend to live for much longer periods of time because they're not typically killing in order to be able to survive. So in the animal existences, they will bounce around for quite a bit in many different animal existences until they get to something like a turtle or an elephant or something like that, to then be able to have an opportunity to come into the human realm. But even animals that are lions and snakes and tigers and things like this, they can actually be reborn directly from that existence into the human realm. This is why we see some humans that'll come into the world and they'll be maybe like a serial murderer from the age of like 18 or 22 or 25, because this being was once in the animal realm, killing and killing and killing, and now maybe they were a lion, they were reborn into a human realm, and they still have that craving to kill, and they just want to kill and kill and kill, right? So this is helping you to be able to understand the world around you and why these things are actually occurring, because some people are coming out of these lower realms into the human realm. Some beings are being reborn from the human realm back into the human realm. Some beings are coming from the heavenly realm, being reborn into the human realm. And this is why we see different states of consciousness from human beings when they're born into the world, and they function differently from one human being to the next. Depending on the level of pollution that's in the mind, an individual will function differently and make different decisions based on what's going on within their own mind. Then there's this hell realm, which this particular realm is also a formless realm. They are experiencing exclusively painful feelings. They have extensive amounts of craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind. And this realm is actually there for them to be able to extinguish their unwholesome results or unwholesome karma. Their lifespan is quite long, where they're experiencing a lot of painful experiences. And it's not an ideal existence. Of course, we wouldn't be interested in being there, but there's the potential that we were in that realm at some point in the past. But now you've made your way to this human existence, and the Buddha teaches you not to allow this human existence to go to waste, that don't be complacent, because it's the ideal existence to be able to make your way to enlightenment. So all of these realms, while they are impermanent and you can easily be reborn in and out of them, you can actually be reborn from the heavenly realm back into any of these other realms. You can even be reborn from the hell realm up into the human realm or the heavenly realm. It's rare for that to occur, but it's actually possible. So it's not like there's a ladder here. It's not like there's like a sequence of events that everybody has to follow in order to be able to get into a certain existence. Beings are being reborn in and out of these different realms all the time. So even a human being can be reborn back down into the hell realm, the animal realm, the afflicted spirit realm, or even up to the heavenly realm, or they can be reborn back into the human realm as well. But once you're in this human realm, you know that you've experienced a certain amount of wholesome results in your past just to be able to get here. And now that's why when you're here, the Buddha suggests to you not to allow this human existence to go to waste, to really work on training your mind and help you to be able to get closer and closer to this enlightened mental state where you're purifying the mind. And one of the beauties about his teachings is that you can actually see as you're training your mind that you're making your way to enlightenment, because it's not about what happens next in your next life. It's about growing and learning and developing in this life. And you'll be able to see certain situations where you know you usually get angry or frustrated or irritated, that when you're in those same situations, your mind's not experiencing that any longer. And you'll know that it's through training your mind with these teachings, because at one time you used to get angry and now you don't get angry or frustrated in that situation any longer. And you'll know it's coming from the purification of your mind and through training of your mind. And as you're training your mind, you might actually experience your past lives. Because as you're moving to this higher consciousness, it's like moving to a higher vantage point. Like if you were to walk outside your house and you were to just see the street that you're standing on, this is like being in the unenlightened state with pollutions in your mind, that you can only see the street that you're on. But as you're purifying your mind, you're moving to this higher consciousness, you have less and less pollution in your mind. It's like moving to this higher vantage point. Now you can see how all the streets interconnect in this town, and you might even be able to see how another town is connected to this particular town that you're looking at. This is what your mind's capable of being able to do, that you have residual memories in your mind from your previous lives, and you might actually observe these from this human realm or previous realms that you were in. You might start having vivid memories of existences in the past. And this is how it's occurring, is through the elimination of pollution from the mind. And as you eliminate that pollution, it's like moving to this higher vantage point. And now you can see more about what's going on in this life and potentially previous lives as well. So before I go on, I'm going to pause here and see if you guys have any questions about these 5 realms or what I've been sharing with you guys so far. And then I'm going to circle back and help you guys to understand what you're doing in order to shed these animalistic instincts on the path to enlightenment. If you guys have questions here, we have microphones in the white bowl. If you guys could use those, because the people online will be able to hear you that way. You just press the gray button, the lights come on, and you can hold it up to your chin and you can ask questions. And then for those of you guys online, you can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or you can raise your hand electronically and ask any and all questions by just unmuting your microphone. So does anybody here or online have any questions? No questions here? Okay, it looks like we have some questions coming in online here. Okay, it looks like Ted or Kristen. Go ahead, guys.
Good. Hi, Teacher David. Thank you. I have a question about Mara. And is Mara in the hell realm, or is that like just a different sort of being altogether?
Yeah, the Buddha describes this being of Mara, which some people might describe this being as the devil or Satan or something like this. This is a formless being that's only interested in causing calamity and unwholesome things in the world. It's typically associated with the hell realm, because when the Buddha taught about these different realms, hell, heavenly realm, and different things, he had subcategories where we tend to think of it as kind of like all one realm, where in the lifetime of the Buddha, he actually divided it into different types of beings within each individual realm. Like here in the human realm, we have people from Spain, we have people, I'm not sure where all of you guys are from, we might have people from Canada or the UK or Australia or different places. We have different ethnicities within the human realm, right? So it's the same thing in the hell realm and in the heavenly realm. There's different types of beings inside of each of those realms. So Mara is typically associated with the hell realm. And then there's other beings in the hell realm as well, but we tend to kind of generalize it and think of it as all one realm and all one type of being. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, it looks like maybe Joe or Adela has a question. Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, Teacher David. Yeah, I have a question around just kind of clarifying these, whether humans, I think you said that humans can go from a human realm to another realm. Is it like if you reach enlightenment, you're not going to end up in any of these realms? Or is it like, or like other religions will say, like, if you do something bad, you go to hell. If you do something good, you go to heaven. Is it like that? Like if you're like a bad person, you might end up in the hell realm and you haven't reached enlightenment.
Okay.
And then if you haven't reached enlightenment, but you've been kind of decent, you might end up in the heavenly realm.
Okay, so when you get to the end of this life, if the mind is unenlightened, it's based on the level of pollution that's in your mind that's going to determine what realm you're born into and in what situation you're born into. It's based on the pollution in your mind. This is the cause and effect, or the action and result. It's the results of your decisions. It's the natural law of karma, where oftentimes people are taught there's some being that's looking at your entire life and judging you of whether you go to a good place or a bad place, and then you go there permanently. That's not actually true. That's not the way the world truly works. Everything in the world is working based on this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result, the results of your decisions. We all have free will. Nobody's sending us to a good place or a bad place. It's our own decisions. So if we choose to be complacent and we don't learn and grow and develop in order to be able to purify our mind, when we get to the end of our life, our mind's going to be pretty polluted. And that's where oftentimes we're reborn down into the lower realms of hell, animal, or afflicted spirit. But if you're working on your mind and you're purifying your mind and you're training your mind, now you're becoming a better and better human being. That's why by the time you get to that first stage of enlightenment, I don't know if you can remember back to chapter 3 when I was teaching that, that first stage of enlightenment, if you die in that stage of enlightenment, you're reborn back into the human realm. The same thing is true about the second stage of enlightenment, because at that point, you've purified your mind enough that you've overcome being reborn into the lower realms. Once you get to the first or second stage of enlightenment, you'll never be reborn back into the lower realms ever again, because you've become a better and better human being at that point. You've escaped the lower realms. So some people, you guys might have been in the previous life a human being, and you might have been in the first or second stage of enlightenment, and now you've been reborn back into the human realm, and it's time for you to get to enlightenment. But for some people, maybe not. Maybe they're coming out of an animal existence, and now they can also still get to enlightenment as well. So if you're unenlightened at the time of your death, based on the level of pollution in your mind, that's going to determine whether you're reborn in any particular realm, and which realm you're being reborn into, and what the condition of your existence is in that realm. But if you get to enlightenment and die, the Buddha explains that you're no longer going to experience rebirth in the cycle of rebirth, but what may or may not come next, he leaves as an undeclared teaching. He doesn't say what does come next or what doesn't come next. He intentionally leaves it as an undeclared teaching. You can see in his teachings where he says, remember what I taught. I taught this, and he explains what he taught. And then he says, remember what I did not teach. I did not teach this. And he gave 10 individual things that he didn't teach. And one of the things he didn't teach is once you get to enlightenment and die, what comes next? And I have my thoughts about why he didn't do this, why he didn't teach it. And it was very wise for him to not teach it. Just one of those things is that by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's so peaceful and joyful in the present moment that you don't care what's next. If something comes next, okay, great. If it doesn't come next, then if there is something next or there isn't something next, fine. It doesn't matter, because it's either as good as what you're currently experiencing or better. But if there isn't something next, that's fine too. Whereas if, let's just say there was something next after enlightenment, and let's just say the Buddha describes what this wonderful thing is. Well, that's one more craving that you have to get rid of, right? Now you're not content in the present moment. You're longing, yearning for this thing after this life. So now you're kind of stuck in this infinite loop that you can't actually get out of the cycle of rebirth, because you still have craving. Because as long as you have craving, your mind is not purified. You're not content and peaceful and joyful in the present moment, that your mind's longing, yearning for this afterlife. So the Buddhist teachings aren't about getting to this wonderful afterlife. It's about getting to a wonderful life now in this existence. So if there was something next, he didn't explain it. And if there wasn't something next, he didn't explain it. He may not have even known, right? One of the things about a Buddha is they will only teach things that they've actually experienced. And no one's ever been enlightened, died, and come back into the world. That's not the way that this works. If you get to enlightenment, you're not coming back into the world. So he may not have known what was next. He intentionally left it as undeclared because he just didn't know. But a Buddha does have a way of understanding things that they haven't actually experienced yet. So if he did know of something that was or wasn't next, he wisely left it as undeclared, because now you can just focus on getting to enlightenment now in this life and not longing, yearning for something after this life. So that should help you, Adele. Does that help you? Do you have any other questions there?
That helped. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere else. Okay, so now to kind of bring this all full circle and help you to understand this evolution of our consciousness from animal to human, the majority of rebirths out of into the human realm is from the animal realm. That oftentimes we're coming out of the animal realm into this human realm. And this is the reason why the unenlightened human mind functions very much like an animal. We also tend to kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, and do things like this. We also have a lack of memory like animals. When we're in the unenlightened state, we tend to have a lack of memory. We also function through this praise and reward system. Like an animal, you can teach it something, give it a little snack, give it some food, and it'll repeat that behavior over and over and over again. Humans are the same way. You go to college or you go to high school and you get a certificate and you get a diploma and you feel really great about that. And now you want to go to college and get another one of those. And then you want another one and another one, another one. Or if your mom and dad say, wow, you've been really good. Good job, Jimmy. Good job, Susie. You feel really good about that. And now you want to repeat that behavior over and over and over again. So just like an animal functions through this praise and reward system, human beings in the unenlightened state function that way as well. We also learn from a pack of like species, just like monkeys learn how to be monkeys from other monkeys and snakes learn how to be snakes from other snakes. Human beings learn how to be human beings from other human beings. So if you grew up in a family that's bitter and harsh and hostile and argumentative, you grew up and your mind was conditioned that way to think that that's the way to be a human being, is to be bitter and harsh and hostile with people. Whereas if you grew up in a more gentle environment, then your mind is thinking in terms of that's the way to be a better and better human being, is to be gentle and warm and loving to people. So our mind is conditioned to think like other human beings around us based on the experiences that we've had. So we have certain instinctive behaviors, and then we have mostly learned behaviors in this human realm. We even have phrases in this human realm where we might say, you are acting like an animal, or you are fighting like cats and dogs. So even without an understanding of the cycle of rebirth and how we've been reborn out of the animal realm into this human realm, there's plenty of people in the world that are talking about it without even realizing what they're talking about. Because we use these phrases all the time. When we say you're acting like an animal or you're fighting like cats and dogs, that's the human being in the unenlightened state functioning like an animal. And somebody's identifying those animalistic behaviors and they're describing that. They're saying you're acting like an animal or you're fighting like cats and dogs. So human beings in the unenlightened state are functioning through this unenlightened mind very much like an animal. In fact, we are fascinated with animals. We study animals. We have whole fields of scientists and researchers that study animals. We have zoos where we put animals and we go and look at the animals. We have pets that we have in our homes and people will sleep with animals. As children, we might have had stuffed animals and we played with them as toys. We might even have fabrics that we wear on our clothing that are like animal prints, and we walk around with this clothing with animal prints because we're fascinated with animals because of our multiple existences in the animal realm. And now that we're in this human realm, our mind retains this level of understanding, and we say things like you're fighting like cats and dogs, or you're acting like an animal. We get stuffed animals, we study animals, we look at animals, we're fascinated by animals, even wearing animal prints. And what we're doing now on this path to enlightenment is we're becoming a better and better human being. You need to make this switch to understand that you're no longer an animal, that we are a human being, and we can evolve past our animalistic instincts. But when you're being bitter and harsh and hostile to people, which if you're unenlightened, you're doing those kinds of things, you're not a bad person, but that's what the mind does in the unenlightened state. It's acting like an animal. It's growling and roaring. And you need to be able to identify that as part of your animalistic instincts, because now you need to understand that that's what you're shedding on the path to enlightenment. And the Buddha is giving you the wisdom that it's important to shed that, but then he's giving you the tools and techniques of how to train your mind to be able to accomplish that. Because what's going on in the mind is what's motivating that moral conduct, that bitterness and harshness and hostility that's coming through your intentions, speech, and actions. You wouldn't be able to eliminate it by just understanding that it's unwise to do it. You need the tools and techniques to eradicate the pollution of the mind that's actually motivating that unskillful conduct. So when you're yelling or hollering or being bitter and harsh and hostile to people, you need to recognize that as your animalistic instinct, and you need to shed that, restrain the mind, and don't allow the mind to do that. When you see your mind is being conceited, where you're measuring and comparing people, where you're looking down on certain people, or you're looking up to certain people with such awe, understand that's your mind trying to find a pecking order. And don't allow your mind to do that. Don't allow your mind to judge other people. Cut that off and let it go. If you notice that your mind is interested in killing or stealing, or maybe going around and having sex with lots of other people, this is your mind having animalistic instincts, because a lot of animals will go around and have sex with lots of different animals. And we can see through our wisdom of the natural law of karma that if we choose to do those kinds of things, it's going to produce unwholesome results for us. This is where we tend to experience sexually transmitted diseases. We can get beat up. We can get murdered. People get jealous. People damage our material possessions. We can lose our reputation in the community. This is the cause and effect of decisions that we're making. Where in the animal realm, we don't have the level of wisdom to understand that it's unwise to go around and have sex with lots of different beings and the problems and difficulties that occur because of it. But in the human realm, we can understand that being bitter, harsh, and hostile to people is unwise. We can understand being judgmental and conceited, looking for a pecking order. We can understand that that's unwise. We can understand things like having lots of sex with lots of different beings over and over and over and over again, rather than just having one loyal, committed relationship where we're in a loving, trusting relationship. We can understand that this is going to cause unwholesome results in our day-to-day life. And now we can choose to make different decisions, but we need to be able to train the mind to eradicate the underlying pollution that's motivating these unskillful decisions that an individual will make in this human state in the unenlightened mind. So this animal consciousness is preoccupied with craving, anger, and ignorance, the ego, this protection of the self, and getting to enlightenment is to train the mind to purify the mind of those animalistic instincts, becoming a better and better human being. And now getting to this enlightened mental state, the mind can be completely peaceful and joyful through the cultivation and training of the mind. But as long as we stay in this animalistic behavior and these animalistic instincts, you can't ever get to that complete peace and joy, because the mind is chasing around its cravings, trying to fulfill its basic survival instincts, rather than evolving and developing your consciousness to this better and better human being. So that's what one is doing on the path to enlightenment, is developing the mind, training the mind, cultivating wisdom, eliminating pollution, shedding these animalistic instincts, and becoming a better and better human being. So this is everything that I have to share with you guys today. If you guys have questions here, you have questions online, let me know about anything that I've been sharing here. Remember, this isn't where you typically would start in your journey to enlightenment, is learning these kinds of things, but it's fine that you guys have. We have different topics each Sunday that I share with students. But if you guys have any questions here or online, I'd be pleased to be able to help you with that. Just let me know. Okay, looks like maybe Kristen or Ted have a question. Go ahead, guys.
Teacher David, it's Kristen again. I remember a while back in one of the classes, you mentioned that having an animal as a pet maybe was unwise because we can become attached to the animal. And you mentioned today that maybe training an animal can help them to come, I guess, kinder, and maybe help them to maybe, I guess, go into like a higher realm after death. So I'm just curious how that would wise then to have an animal maybe, or is it still unwise since there's attachment involved?
Yeah, everybody needs to decide for themselves. I would never put myself in a situation of telling other people whether they should or shouldn't have an animal. But what we were talking about in those previous classes is how that by having an animal, an individual is now accepting responsibility for that being's life. And now you're making decisions for that being that are life or death decisions. And now you're going to have conflicts and difficulties in making those decisions. And now an individual might be keeping this being for its own reasons, its own selfish reasons, rather than just allowing it to be able to have free will, to be able to make decisions on its own, to go do things on its own. Where once we have a pet in our home, we're typically doing this out of our own selfish desires, to have this being close to us and wanting it to fulfill some craving that we have in our own mind. Where in reality, if we just let these beings do what they would like to do and exercise their free will, then they get to go off into the world and do whatever it is that they would like to do. So for example, if there was some giant in this world that was more dominant than human beings, and this big giant was keeping us caged up like animals and pets, and they were petting us and brushing us and taking care of us. Maybe some of you guys might be like, wow, that sounds pretty good. Maybe I'd like to do that, right? That's probably what Ted's thinking, right? But anyway, if we had some giant that was caging us and keeping us confined to a cage, essentially like a prison, we wouldn't stand for that. We would revolt, right? We wouldn't stand for this animal. And if we, or this giant, or if we had these giants that were harvesting our eggs or chopping up our bodies and eating them, as human beings, we wouldn't stand for that. We would revolt, right? So what you heard me sharing is that, yes, the mind can get attached to an animal, and now you're going to experience discontentedness because of it, but you're also putting yourself in a situation where you're making decisions that are for this other being, and now you're going to need to navigate this to a point where it's oftentimes very difficult and very challenging for the mind to be able to navigate that and experience complete peace and joy. Because, like, for example, if someone euthanizes a pet, they can oftentimes feel guilt and shame and sorrow when they're doing this, because their mind is now making decisions about a life of another being, where that being itself may not make that decision for itself. It might not decide that it would like to be euthanized, but yet we're putting ourselves in a position where we're now making that decision for that being. Where what you need to be able to get to in order to practice unconditional love is where you're not putting your expectations on others and you're not controlling people to do things your way. And not just people, but beings like animals as well. So what you heard me saying today, though, is that animals have evolved to the point where they're getting training from human beings. And I'm not saying that's a wise thing or an unwise thing. I'm just saying this is the fact of where we're at in our human existences, in our humanity as a whole, that we've evolved to the point where there's lots of interaction between humans and animals. And because of this, animals are becoming more and more gentle, more and more loving, more and more kind, and it's actually promoting more and more human beings coming into the world. Scientists share with us that 99% of the animals that once existed no longer exist in the world today. That what we see as animals only represents 1% of the animals that exist in the world. So we can see that if the animal realm is shrinking, then if this is true, what I'm explaining to you about the cycle of rebirth, that animals can't get to enlightenment, we would think that those beings in the animal realm would need to be reborn somewhere else. So we would see an expansion of the human realm. And that's exactly what we see. We see 8 billion human beings now, right? So as this animal realm has shrunk, some of those beings were reborn back into the animal realm, but some of them were in the hell realm, some of them were inflicted spirit, some of them were in the heavenly realm, but some of them have come into the human realm. And that's exactly what we see. And we're seeing that happening at a higher pace because of human beings' involvement with animals. I'll give you this one story. I shared it this morning in class as well, is that in Cambodia, there was this rat that they trained to be able to sniff out landmines so that it could find landmines, because a rat is lighter than a human being. And in Cambodia, you guys probably know that from the war, there's landmines all over the place, and it's affecting human beings that are getting injured and even killed from these landmines. So they trained this rat, because it's very light, that it could walk on the earth and it could sniff out landmines. And then when it found a landmine, the humans would go over there and dig it up and make it safe. And in this life of this rat, it found 100 landmines during its life. Right? Now, that rat would have never done that without human intervention. Humans actually trained it to be able to do this. Well, I suspect that when that rat died, because it died a few years ago, that's how I know about it, it was in the news, that when it died, I suspect it was reborn as a human, or maybe even in the heavenly realm, because of its loving kindness, because of its compassion, because of its generosity, that it was able to move up to either a human or heavenly existence. But that would have never happened without human beings. So, Kristen, I'm not saying whether this is a good thing or a wise thing or an unwise thing. It's just the fact of what's transpiring and why we see what we see. I'm just describing to you why you see what you see in the world, and then you can penetrate into that and be able to see the truth for yourself, that the Buddha's teachings are actually describing exactly what we see going on in the world.
I understand. Thank you, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for bringing that up. All right. So Joe or Adela has a question. Go ahead, guys.
Hey, it's Adela again.
Hmm.
I have a question also around animals and having pets. We recently adopted a cat or a kitten.
Hmm.
I know you talk about like you're essentially like controlling this animal, deciding what it does, when it eats, and where it goes, and all that. But are we not in turn also being like compassionate by adopting from a shelter and helping it? Because otherwise, it would be caged up in this little space for the rest of its life. So would that not be good karma for us by doing that?
Yeah, this is why I don't share with people what they should or shouldn't do in their life, because you could make you could see in certain situations this could be a wise decision for some people, but in other situations it could be unwise. Sometimes what the mind is looking for in teachings like this is kind of like black and white, and just tell me what I should or shouldn't be doing. This isn't what the Buddha is doing. He's helping you to be able to see how to get to a point where you purify your mind and you train it to eliminate these pollutions. So, for example, I grew up with animals all my life. My mom had all kinds of animals as we were growing up, and I lived with all different kinds of animals. And as I grew up, when I went out on my own, I chose not to have animals. But at one point here in Thailand, we did end up getting a dog, which we eventually chose not to have any longer. But this was me extinguishing my craving, because one of the ways to extinguish a craving is to cut it off and let it go. But another way to do it is to actually fulfill it by choosing to do it. So if somebody has a craving for an animal and to have an animal as a pet, they could cut that off and let it go and choose to not get an animal. And this could potentially be wise for them. But for some people, they might actually choose to get an animal. And by choosing to get an animal and taking care of it, they might help them to extinguish this craving, because they fulfilled their craving to be able to then train your mind to let it go. And you've probably heard me use the example of the Philippines when I talk about this, right? So if I was going to have an animal at this point, I would do what you're describing, which is in America, you can go to shelters and you can adopt animals from there. And this is actually helping to solve a problem. One of the problems that you can see from the teachings of the Buddha is that when you base your livelihood on living beings, if you remember back to the Eightfold Path, when I was teaching right livelihood, he teaches you those 5 livelihoods that cause harm in the world. And it would be unwise to be able to have a livelihood that is business and weapons, business and living beings, meat, substances that cause heedlessness and poisons. Well, one of the livelihoods that some people have is they base their life off of selling other living beings, right? There might be a breeder who's breeding dogs and cats and other animals like this, and now they're sustaining their life on this. And now this is happening so much in some places of the world, you have animals that aren't being taken care of, they're being abused. So a shelter is trying to solve this, is trying to help with this, so that these beings can have some better type of life than what they would have had otherwise in this abusive, neglective household. So if somebody chooses to adopt that animal, yeah, that is their loving kindness and compassion, and it is helping that animal. But whether they choose to do it or not is a decision for them to make. At this point in my life, I wouldn't have an animal, because I understand what I understand about the natural law of karma, and I wouldn't be interested in having an animal in our home and being responsible for this being. But if somebody else did choose to do it, and that's their choice, they could potentially be working to eliminate a craving for this, and this is actually beneficial for them. So you won't find too many places in the teachings of the Buddha where things are black and white, because there's this gray area, and what you're working to be able to do is eliminate your cravings, your desires, your attachments. And for some people, that means that they might need to actually have an animal in order for them to be able to extinguish that. But if it's possible for them to cut it off and let it go, that's what I would suggest for somebody to do, because once you get into a relationship with an animal, you're now making decisions about this other being's life that is going to lead to complications in the way that you approach this. But if somebody was like, no, I definitely need an animal, then going to a shelter would be a wise way to potentially take care of that and help them to extinguish that craving.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm just going to check if we have any other questions. Looks like we have some stuff coming in on YouTube here. Let me see. This person is saying, conceited, measuring and comparing. Can we just cut that off and let it go immediately? Or is it only after some time following the gradual training that one can let it go? There's certain proactive training that the Buddha teaches you to be able to eliminate your conceit. I taught this in chapter 16. You might decide to go back and look at that, because chapter 16 is all about the ego and eliminating personal existence view and conceit. So you can read it in our book, because you can get it from our website, which is buddhadailywisdom.com, and you can get it for free. You can take it and go print it. You can get printed versions on Amazon, or you can get them here at our temple if you're in Chiang Mai. But I taught about conceit and what that is in more detail and how to eliminate it, because there's certain proactive things that you need to do over a consistent long-term period, multiple years. It's going to take you to be able to get rid of your ego and your conceit. But also, as part of that training, not only do you do proactive training to get rid of it, that you cut it off and let it go in the moment too. So when you see your ego arising, when you see the conceit arising, you'd like to cut it off and let it go. And that's where the breathing mindfulness meditation comes in, and all the other factors of the Eightfold Path. This is where your generosity comes in, and training your mind to let go. Because just to say cut it off and let it go, okay, but if your mind doesn't know how to do that and you haven't trained this internal mechanism to be able to let go, you'll find it very challenging to let go. So that's why there's this core central teaching of the Eightfold Path that is very comprehensive, that you need to be able to learn each individual factor. And I'm going to be teaching this tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. As part of our course that I'm going to be teaching Monday through Friday this week from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I'm going to be live streaming it. And that's Thai time. So if you'd like to attend, you can attend, or you can watch online, where I'm going to be teaching the Eightfold Path. You can even watch the recordings if you like. This is the core central teaching of the Buddha that you're going to need to know, because eliminating the ego, yes, there's these proactive things, and there's cutting off and letting go in the moment as well. But you really need to know the Eightfold Path to be able to really make real headway into any of these pollutions that the Buddha teaches you. If you don't know that inside and out, backwards and forwards, you're going to find it very challenging to make any kind of progress with something like the ego or any of these other pollutions. So I really suggest you start with that, which is actually chapter 4 and 5 in this book. And you can see it on our YouTube channel, since you're on YouTube. You can search our YouTube channel for the Eightfold Path, and you'll be able to see where I've taught that many times. And then we have another question coming in here on YouTube. What can we do to verify past lives? You wouldn't be interested to try to initiate that. If you try to initiate the observation of your past lives, then you're not going to be able to trust whether or not that's actually true or not, because you're trying to initiate it. Instead, what you would like to be able to do is you'd like to be able to just train your mind on the path using that Eightfold Path that we were just talking about. And as you're getting rid of these pollutions out of the mind, there's the potential that you might observe your past lives. But if you try to force your mind to be able to experience this, you're not going to be able to trust whether it's true or it's false. But if you're getting rid of these pollutions out of your mind gradually over time, if your mind's going to have residual memories of your past lives, it will happen. It's not going to happen for everybody, but for some people it will, and some people it won't. And if it does, great, that's fine. But if it doesn't, great, that's fine too. Because observing your past lives, there's only a couple of things that are really going to happen for you here. One, it's going to absolutely confirm for you that the cycle of rebirth is true. But you can actually accomplish this in other ways too. You don't actually have to observe your past lives to be able to confirm the cycle of rebirth. The other thing that it does for you is certain cravings that you have in your mind right now in this existence, they're coming from your previous life. And it's kind of interesting to be able to see that, but it's not required in order for you to be able to eliminate them in this life. Because the fact is that they're in your mind now, and you need to be able to eliminate them. The fact that they're from a previous life or this life, it doesn't actually really matter, because they're in your mind and you need to get rid of them. So while it's interesting to be able to see that there's these cravings that you have in your mind today from previous lives, it's not detrimental to your growth and development on the path to enlightenment. So while it's interesting to see your past lives, if you try to initiate it, you wouldn't be able to trust it. But even if you do start to observe your past lives by doing what I'm suggesting, which is just focus on training your mind and getting rid of your pollution, there's only those two things that are actually going to benefit you. And you actually don't need those two things in order to be able to make your way to enlightenment. You don't need to observe your past lives in order to get to enlightenment. So I suggest you focus on training the mind and getting rid of the pollution of the mind. That's what's actually going to help you get to enlightenment. Focusing on your past lives isn't really going to produce any type of significant benefit that's going to really help you to make your way to enlightenment. But focusing on purifying your mind, getting rid of those 10 fetters and those pollutions, that's what's going to help you to get to enlightenment. You have a question? Mm-hmm. Would you mind grabbing a mic back there? That way the people online will be able to hear you. You're welcome. For those of you guys on YouTube that are saying thank you, you're very welcome. Pleased to help you.
Hi, Ed. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
How would one recognize if it's a past memory or something like that?
Because you'll know it hasn't happened in this life. You'll start having these vivid thoughts and memories in your mind, and you'll know that it wasn't in this life that those things occurred. So like the example that I use about being murdered, I had vivid memories of being murdered. And I had other memories too, lots of different memories. And it plagued me all throughout my life, and I didn't understand it. And then once I started studying the teachings of the Buddha, it made complete sense. So I didn't read the teachings of the Buddha, and my mind was conditioned to believe that there was a cycle of rebirth. I never believed in the cycle of rebirth. But once I started having all these vivid memories, and I was having those prior to ever studying the teachings of the Buddha, I had all these different experiences all the way back to when I was 8 years old. I remember having certain experiences, and there was all these different experiences all through my life, and I never understood them. And then by the time I started studying the Buddha's teachings, I was like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense now. So you might have already had some of these experiences, or you may not have, but you'll know it because you'll start having vivid memories in your mind. You can even have certain bodily sensations, like the thing that happened to me when I was 8 years old. I had significant pain in my legs. I was laying in bed at 8 years old, and I kept crying out to my mom and dad every single night because I had this excruciating pain in my legs. And they would come running into my room and like, what's going on? What's going on? I was like, my legs, they're so much painful. They're so painful. And they didn't understand it, and I didn't understand it because there was nothing wrong with my legs. But later, when I observed all these different past lives and had all these different experiences, I realized that my legs were broken when I was murdered in a previous life. And that's where this was coming from. And that's that pain that I was experiencing at 8 years old. But I didn't understand that at 8 years old. So you kind of sometimes connect all these dots as you're going in life. Yeah. And it's memories that you're having in your mind. And there's different experiences like this that you can have. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do, I see somebody has their little furry baby there. Who's that? Oh, that's Marcy. I should have known that was Marcy. Hey, is that a little kitty cat or a dog or something? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to end class here by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for being interested to learn the teachings of the Buddha. Thank you for everyone online who's joined as well. If you guys would like to learn more, we have classes Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And then we have courses and retreats all throughout the month and throughout the year. You can see on our bulletin board over there. You can see on our website. You can come talk to me, and I'll be able to help you get plugged into the resources to be able to help you really get started at the beginning. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. is actually a great place to get started because I'm going to be teaching the core central teaching of the Buddha tomorrow morning. And if you would like to come to the whole course, you're welcome to. But even if you would like to just attend tomorrow morning, you're more than welcome to do that as well. People will come and go throughout the course, all the way through the course. So whatever you guys choose to do for the rest of the evening, have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your evening. We'll see you next time. Sawadee krap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.